up on your screen. Thanks, Jenny. All right, so obviously this is an ACAP webinar funded by ACAP. This is our funding acknowledgement and sorry, my screen's fighting me today. All right, so today we're going to talk about ACAs and HUAs, and really the goal of this webinar is to help clarify what that compliance really looks like and the requirements for ACAP, and then we'll talk through a few possible solutions for this that can be administered through ACAP. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Kaylee. I'm the Ag and Civil Engineering Educator with CACAT, and presenting with me today, we also have Jake, also from the center. He's an Ag Conservation Educator, and then Patrick is here as well, and he is one of the SCC ACAP Regional Coordinators. Eric's online too to help answer some questions once we get to that part. And Jenny is going to help monitor the chat a little bit as well. So as we're going through, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll answer them at that time if that makes sense, or we'll come to them at the end. There'll also be plenty of time for discussion at the end that you can unmute and ask your questions. So we're going to start with some terminology, just kind of making sure we're all in the same playing field here with what words we're using for what, because there's a little confusion around that sometimes, especially with HUAs. We're going to talk through the ACAP policy requirements. We're going to spend some time identifying and evaluating ACAs and if they need addressed or not, talk through some solutions, and also show a few field examples. So to start with some terminology, as most of you probably have heard, ACA is an animal concentration area. And according to the Pennsylvania Code, an ACA could be something like a barnyard, a feedlot, basically an area that's not going to maintain a growing crop and where the manure nitrogen is in excess of the crop needs, thus causing resource concerns. And this term does exclude areas managed as pastures and other cropland, and just a reminder that pasture is defined as a minimum of 3 inches of desirable vegetation. So that doesn't mean there can't be ACAs within a pasture though, but the pasture itself hopefully is not being considered an ACA, and does exclude pasture access ways as long as they don't cause direct flow of nutrients to either the surface water or groundwater. So that's kind of a fancy definition, but what does that really mean for us? So it's also important to note that in this case, an ACA, or an animal concentration area, and an HUA, a heavy use area, are used interchangeably. Okay, so they're synonymous. They both are considered the resource concern, the area we're talking about. So really this means vegetation's not growing. It's typically an area where animals are congregating and then ultimately depositing manure. And it's something that must be addressed if it's causing a resource concern. Those resource concerns include either nutrients or sediment leaving that site. Like I said, lots of different examples. A few barnyards, we see those as ACAs or HUAs very often. Also feeding and watering areas because they're pretty high trafficked by animals. Sacrifice and exercise lots also sometimes end up being ACAs as well as loafing areas, which could just be a shady area in the pasture or any other area that the animals kind of are drawn to and tend to hang out as. So as you could see, they don't necessarily have to be confined to these areas. It might just be an area they're drawn to for a specific reason. So then we get to HUAP, which is a heavy use area protection. And the clear distinction here is that the HUA, or the heavy use area, is the resource concern, but the HUAP, which is the heavy use area protection, is the BMP, is the best management practice. It's an NRCS term. And we know that a lot of times we use HUA when we really are intending to say HUAP. So we just want to make sure we're clarifying that technically heavy use area protection is the best management practice. And really what that is a planned, stabilized surface used to treat an ACA or HUA. And the goal of this is to reduce erosion and nutrient pollution, and ultimately work to improve water quality. So a few examples, this is not an all-encompassing list, obviously, but one unique example could be a front apron, like you see here on the left. So in this situation, this is currently being constructed. This is going to be an area that there's going to be a lot of vehicle traffic. So the skid steer is going to be moving in and out of the facility. There's the ag bags are going to be right next to it. So they're going to be moving feed for the animals. So it's going to be a high trafficked area. There's going to be a lot of turning. So there's a lot of opportunity to kind of disturb the ground there. So this is something that we could do to help protect that area, stabilize it with concrete, as you see here. Another example could be a watering pad. This could also look very similar if it was a feeding area as well. Just a stabilized surface near that area where you're going to have a lot of animal traffic. They're going to be hanging out for long periods of time. There's a lot of potential there to kind of move the ground around, increase erosion in that area, as well as potentially deposit more manure. So this stabilized area also lets you manage that a little bit easier. And maybe another one that we don't see quite as often could be a wood chip lot. We don't always have to use concrete to address an HUA. Heavy use area protection could also be a wood chip lot, a gravel lot. There's other materials that we could use to hit that compliance piece of it. And as you can see here, it's a very temporary-ish solution, pretty easy solution there with the temporary fencing. There's also some good vegetation around it as well. And Patrick's going to get into that a little bit here. So next, Patrick's going to talk a little bit more about the ACAP policy requirements.
All right, sure thing. Thank you, Kaylee. Okay, so some considerations for baseline compliance that are required for the ACAP program. So as I'm sure you all know, it's required that if you are doing a project or receive an application from a livestock operation, they are required to have their manure management plans, of course. And so some of the requirements within that manure management plan that will achieve baseline compliance for the ACAP program, you see some of them here. So these are big picture principles of things we want to achieve when we're doing planning, when we're meeting with farmers and discussing potential resource concerns on their farms and how we can go about correcting those resource concerns. So a primary one would be diverting upslope water that's clean. That's a major one. We always talk about keeping clean water clean. So that's really key for us in achieving baseline compliance. If you do have polluted water on a site, it is stored and or treated before it enters a water body. Animals not having free access to streams around ACAs, minimizing the size of an ACA or an HUA. That's key as well. If you say, let's say we have a 5 beef animal operation and they have a 1 acre ACA, those animals can be contained to a much smaller area and still have their needs met, still be fed and cared for properly without such a large disturbance on the landscape. So that's another key thing to think about when you're talking baseline compliance with your farmers. Movable structures, there's certainly a possibility within those ACAs. The key part about movable, if you have one in a particular location for one winter, and then it's able to be moved to another location for the next winter, you can revegetate that area so we're not continually having a spread of that ACA and continually taking up more ground with that. Another key element of that baseline compliance is continuously and routinely accumulating that manure and collecting it so that it's not just spread out across the landscape and therefore moving off into water bodies. Kaylee, can you advance this for me? Thank you. Okay. So why is this baseline compliance important for the ACAP program? As you all know, we need to be addressing ACAs in order to be eligible for any projects within the ACAP program, even if it's not directly connected to livestock housing. So if you have an application come in for a grassed waterway, let's say, out on a crop field, but that operation also has untreated ACAs that are creating resource concerns, they need to be addressed at the same time so that they can be eligible for that grassed waterway project. All right, go ahead. Okay. All right, so some things to consider when we're determining whether an ACA or an HUA is in fact creating a resource concern and therefore something that needs to be dealt with. So some of those key elements here, we have evidence of erosion. Is there runoff from the ACA that is not being treated before it's entering a water body? How close is it to a water body? There's a big difference between an ACA that is directly within a stream versus being several hundred feet away from a stream. Those are two different situations that need to be evaluated in particular ways. Is there a lack of vegetation around that ACA or within that ACA? Again, that goes back to treating the runoff coming from one of these areas. And is there compacted soil? Obviously, the more compaction we have within a soil, you're going to have less infiltration, you're going to have poorer root growth, all of which leads to increased runoff and increased nutrient loading into water bodies. Okay, so we're going to go through some picture examples here next, and you can type into the chat whether you think there's an issue here that needs to be addressed in order to achieve that ACAP compliance, or is it fine the way it is?
And every entry enters you into a raffle, and your prize could be extra drink tickets at next year's AgCon. So make sure you participate.
Okay, so our first picture here, we have a pasture with what appears to be a animal trail right along the fence line here. To the right of that fence, you can see there's vegetation there. It looks like some trees.
Hey,
In the
Patrick.
background, yeah,
Sorry, I'm gonna stop you quick.
yeah,
Jig realized I think since it was fighting you to go through these,
yeah.
it skipped this slide
Oh, yes, we
for
did.
you. So we'll
Okay,
go
yeah.
over that and then go back to the photos.
Okay, yep, good catch. Thank you. Yeah, very important slide here. So this comes directly from the ACAP law. So this is the law that we are required to follow as the State Conservation Commission, as well as those conservation districts and other delegates that are operating this program on a local level. So I'll just read that here. An agricultural operation with an animal concentration area shall have implemented best management practices necessary to abate stormwater runoff, loss of sediment, loss of nutrients, and runoff of other pollutants from the animal concentration area, or the implementation of such best management practices shall be included in an application for funds. So, what is this all to say? This boils down to the best management practices to minimize runoff from an ACA need to be in place ahead of the application, and there are no issues related to ACAs on this particular operation that's applying for ACAP funding. Or if there are active issues related to ACAs, they need to be included in part of the application that you're receiving from that particular farmer.
Okay, back to our regularly scheduled programming. There you go.
Okay. All right. So again, our first photo here, we have an animal walkway right along the fence here. We have some grass that appears to the right side of this fence. It looks to be a big willow tree back in the top right corner of this photo. So if you guys want to put in the chat whether you think there's an issue here that needs to be addressed in order to achieve that baseline compliance, or is this operation okay the way it stands? Kaylee, are you able to manage the chat or see that, or is Jenny doing that?
I can see it.
Okay.
We're getting no, it's very small. All right, now we're getting some mixed. Some people think it's not an ACA. Some people think it needs to be addressed. Generally, people are thinking that it's okay.
Okay.
There's a few more coming in.
Okay. Yep. I'm seeing those pop up here.
Troy says the trail and walkway is not an ACA.
Okay.
Other people think it's not serious enough to be an ACA. So generally, we're thinking no.
Okay. I saw one there from Joel. Maybe it depends. He
Mhm.
brings up an excellent point here. For the sake of this discussion, we'll just evaluate this photo, but it's always good to ground truth it. Ask for additional photos or additional maps. Even better, go out to the operation and take a look at it for yourself. Look at the operation in its totality. But from my view and the SEC view for this photo directly, we would not say that there is an issue here that needs to be addressed in order to be eligible for ACAP. Yes, there is some permanently denuded areas here, but it's a relatively small area. We have good vegetation upslope there that's going to minimize the amount of water that's coming to this area. And then below this area on the right side of the fence, again, we have good vegetation, and we've got good trees there. So based on this photo, I would say that there is not a need to do additional practices. It's always good to suggest additional practices to the farmer to see if they're potentially interested. But if they were not, again, this would not be something that would halt a future ACAP application.
What about the bale feeder back there? Someone pointed that out.
Okay.
Really far back there, it's kind of hard to see.
Yep. Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And again, if when you notice that in the photo, maybe that's something you go out and ground truth, or you speak with the farmer. Hey, I noticed you have that bale feeder in the background there. Is there any sort of ACA around that area? What's the condition of the ground around that area? And maybe again, then that would be something that needs to be dealt with. Yep, that's an excellent point. Okay, so next photo here. Again, if you want to put your thoughts into the chat here. All right, very quick. Yes, there. Yes. Okay. It appears to be a unanimous decision here that yes, there is an issue here that needs to be addressed to achieve that baseline compliance. And I completely agree with that. We have a very large ACA here with a bale feeder, so animals are consistently in here. Um, you can see behind the bale feeder in the farm lane, there appears to be water coming into the lot. And there's obviously a lot of ponding of water here as well. Um, and you can see in the background there, there's that little blue shed. Just on the other side of that, there appears to be a stream. So we have close conveyance to a water body. So yes, this is absolutely something that would need to be addressed in order to be eligible for ACAP funding. All right, third one here. We have a pasture here, a animal trail here, consistent walking area where the cattle are walking. We can see a stream in the background there behind the cow.
A lot of those coming in.
Yep. Okay. Again, it seems to be a unanimous decision that I agree with. This in and of itself is not something that would need to be addressed in order to achieve that baseline compliance. Again, there's probably things you want to discuss with the farmer that could be potential additions to an ACAP application, but this little trail in and of itself would not be something that would hold up an ACAP application. All right, this one here. So we have what appears to be a stream crossing here and some stream bank erosion, it looks like. We have cattle have access to the water here.
A lot of people are still thinking on this one.
Yep,
This is a trickier one.
as they should. This is a trickier one.
We have some mixed opinions. Some people think it's not an ACA, but should be addressed. Oh, now we have a lot of no's coming in. The
Maybe.
maybe. Yeah.
Okay. State law does not require you to fence animals out of stream. That's true. So it seems
Also,
a bit of a mixed bag here, I would
mhm.
say. And I would agree with that. We pose these questions as a yes or no. Maybe this one's a bit of a trick question because I would say maybe to this one. If a conservation district sent me this photo without any additional details, this is something I would definitely want to go out and ground truth, because it could go either way. You can see we have what appears to be a fairly regular animal crossing here that's muddy. We've got some sloughing off of the stream banks, but at the same time, we have pretty dense vegetation around that area. We've got some big trees, it appears, along the stream bank in this particular area. So this is something that could go either way. And just within this photo, I wouldn't be confident to give a definitive answer one way or the other. So this is a great example of the benefit of going out and ground truthing it, speaking with the farmer. Let's say, for an example, maybe we've got a lot of consistent rain in the recent months, and that's why this vegetation looks as green as and dense as it does. You can ask the farmer, is this what it looks like on average over the last few years, or is this much greener than you would typically see it? You can ask those sort of questions, but there's more information that would be needed from this photo and from this operation before making that determination.
For anyone who is concerned about this one, it is being addressed.
Yes. Okay. Another photo here. So we can see a mineral feeder here. There's some vegetation, it appears, in this close into the feeder there. It's not great. Looking back farther into the picture to the left, vegetation does appear to get much better. And then it appears there is a culvert coming under this road, and a stream appearing out in the mid-ground of that pasture there. So what do folks think about this one? Is there an issue here that needs to be addressed, or would they be in compliance for ACAP purposes?
Did we stump everyone?
May have.
All right,
All
now
right,
we
Chelsea says
no.
no,
Got some
no,
no's.
no,
It's
no.
an ACA, but a small one. Stabilization would be recommended. Most of the vegetation looks like weeds.
Yep, not yet, but may need to be addressed in the future. That's a good comment. Okay, yep, good comment, Kent. Yeah, so for this one, I would say the way it stands right now from what we're seeing in this picture, we would not have to do anything in the immediate to achieve that baseline compliance. Are there issues here? Certainly. As a few people mentioned within their comments, in a few years, there probably would be an issue. I think that's a fair comment to make. Key things for me, the true ACA is relatively small right around that feeder. There is some vegetation around it. And then as you go back into the pasture, it appears there's a few hundred feet of pretty good vegetation before you hit that stream. So for those reasons, I would not say that there's something that needs to be done in the immediate, but it's certainly a conversation I would have with the farmer about the management of this area. Um, Again, finding out the number of animals that are using this area. Could this area be shrunk down? Could it only be used during the winter so that you have good vegetation out around it and you're minimizing again that area that is becoming denuded? All of those sort of things are really important here. So, yep, very good. So, key things to think about, the key things to keep in mind when you're discussing with farmers or when you're out there on site. Use good judgment, ask lots of questions. It's okay if you don't give them an immediate answer. You can say, I need to, show these photos or throw this around with some colleagues, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible with a determination. Asking for a second opinion is big. None of us know everything. There's lots of people out there with varying degrees of experience. And no matter how much experience you have, it's always good to throw ideas around with somebody else that you know and trust. and just make sure that you're making the best decision possible. Um, Key thing with this baseline compliance, focus on compliance over perfection. I think it's safe to say that none of those photos we just showed you were perfect. There's something that could certainly be done with all of them, but focusing on that compliance portion is key here.
All right. All right. Well, hopefully that gave you a good background on, what it is we're talking about here, what an ACA or an HUA is, and when they need to be addressed. So we're just going to run through some of those solutions now and how to address them. It may not let me advance either, Kaylee.
I gave you permission.
I
There we
got
go.
it.
Okay. Yep.
All right. So first up, we'll talk a little bit about the engineered solutions. These are probably the most common that we're seeing out there. This is the roofed heavy use area protection that everybody wants. I've heard leadership kind of refer to this as a beneficial animal resting nook, and you can think of the acronym for that one. But really, what we're trying to achieve here is to get an area for animals to be pulled back up off of the landscape, out of the pastures when they can't be grazing there anymore, or there's too much rain or whatever, we're in droughty conditions, etc. So they can come back and be fed on a stable area. And these nutrients are not then running off and into our surface waters, polluting waterways. And often they need to be engineered because maybe we're dealing with a large number of animals that we're trying to put in a small space for long periods of time, and potentially there's no room on the landscape to kind of control the runoff that would come from doing that in a more natural way, like with a vegetated treatment filter or something like that. So roofs become necessary then to keep clean water clean and dirty water dirty, like Patrick mentioned. So these engineered solutions are roofed heavy use area protections are often used. They're popular. Neighbors see it when the neighboring farm has one go up, and all of a sudden it's something that they want as well. And they're really effective. And this can not, they're not always roofed. Sometimes they're just open concrete pads, and the runoff that from rainwater hitting that pad is controlled in a different way. Sometimes it's just curbing and diversions to try and keep, again, clean water clean and dirty water dirty. Some of the benefits of these type of engineered solutions are that they last a really long time. They're going to be durable, and they're because there's so much thought that goes into them, and you're dealing with really nice hard surfaces to work on without, mud and things like that. They're going to be easy to maintain over time as well. And part of the idea there is making them easier to maintain is hoping that that producer will continue to maintain it and use it as it's intended, so that that practice can continue to kind of serve its purpose as a conservation practice versus that beneficial animal resting nook that people talk about. They're very expensive. So that's obviously a negative. It's also something that requires an engineer. They're kind of can take a lot of time. There's a long planning process, often a lot of permits that are associated with these practices. So the whole process to get these designed through construction bidding and then ultimately constructed and on the ground takes quite a bit of time. And even though they're easier to maintain, there is added management to this as well. Producers have to use them as they're intended and not use them, just as another place on their farm to house animals. And then the ACA all of a sudden exists now on the outside of what we it is this practice that we intended to be used to prevent and treat the ACAs. So that management component is going to be critical even for these engineered heavy use area protections. So newsflash though, not every ACA needs a roof to be addressed. Patrick started talking about this a little bit as far as the baseline compliance goes. And then there's lots of other tools in our toolbox, right? They're a very important tool in our toolbox. Sometimes they're the most appropriate treatment for a given situation, but it's not always that it has to be a roofed heavy use area to treat the problems that are out there. There's a lot of things that you can do just with management alone that may not even involve an ACAP application, or maybe just involves a small amount of funding from ACAP versus the kind of costs that are associated with a lot of concrete and roofed heavy use areas, et cetera. Like Patrick mentioned, minimizing the size of the animal concentration areas, diverting water to keep clean water clean, and controlling the runoff that comes from them so that we don't have concentrated flows going right into our waterways. That's the baseline compliance piece. That's the piece that, if we can achieve all that, we're meeting our goals. We can do other projects on that farm, or we can even do small projects to help them just meet those goals to treat the ACAs that are on those farms. The last thing there is that regular scraping of ACAs. That's part of that management piece. Regardless, the picture here obviously has concrete freshly installed. You got to keep it clean. The more that it builds up, the more potential you have for runoff leaving the site. So regardless of whether it's roofed or unroofed or anything like that, management is going to be critical here. There's a lot of different low cost practices that kind of roll into what I was just discussing, and what Patrick and everybody went over earlier. Things like vegetated buffers or vegetated treatment areas, they're utilized to treat that runoff that's coming from these brown areas, these animal concentration or heavy use areas that are untreated, to abate the nutrients and runoff that are leaving that site prior to it entering surface waters. Then you have things like diversions and roof gutters, these level lip spreaders, other stormwater controls. They're all meant to keep your clean water clean. So minimizing the amount of water that is going to be running through these brown areas and ultimately running off. And then finally, our other practices, the wood chip HUA that Kaylee mentioned earlier, even gravel heavy use area protection, where we're going in and installing geotextile fabric, different aggregates, so that we have nice, stable gravel lots that then can be maintained over time. And manure can be scraped off of those. They're not muddy messes. They're better for animal health. We're controlling the runoff that's from them. So these are all practices that can help us achieve the same goals. So again, there's pluses and minuses to these alternatives as well. The benefits here are we're going a less expensive route. They're a little bit quicker to install, to permit, to design. They're generally much lower impact as far as that goes. And then these practices also can meet those baseline ACAP requirements as well. On the negative side, they probably are going to require even more maintenance than what some of the more engineered hard practices like a roofed heavy use area protection would require, because you have a little bit more risk. These are generally unroofed. They're going to be more susceptible to the elements. They really require that producer to be diligent about keeping animal clean, or manure cleaned up off of that site, and about keeping the fresh water separated from that site. So they're going to require more maintenance and added management. And they can be more temporary too, because these aren't hard, often, not always anyhow, but often they aren't hard and fast conservation practices that are installed permanently on the landscape. Part of that is by design. I think Patrick mentioned you could be moving these ACAs that are going to develop throughout the year around different parts of your farm, helping to transport those nutrients around. Obviously, there's a lot of considerations that go into that, part of the planning process, and making sure that you're not creating a scenario where you're moving it by a stream every time and then ultimately having more nutrients run off. But there's a lot of different tools in our toolbox on these alternatives and management side that can achieve the same results. So there's some rough considerations. First and foremost, it's a systems approach. We really need to be thinking about the entirety of their operation to understand what the needs are. And like I said, sometimes the best tool is something that's hard and fast. And there's like a roofed heavy use area protection, where there's no other way we can think about controlling the potentially polluted runoff from those sites. And within that type of a system, we still have to then work with the producer to understand the management that's necessary, when animals need to be pulled off of pastures, et cetera, to go onto those heavy use area protections to kind of get at that environmental concern and resource concerns that exist on these farms. Those associated practices that go with them, a roof system is going to have roof runoff structures and controlling the rainwater that's coming off, traffic flow there at the end, your access lanes on the farms, different stormwater considerations to keep that clean water clean, regardless of what type of a treatment you're proposing at the site, are all going to be very important. And things like utilities and thinking about where is our pipelines, gas pipelines, and where are overhead power lines or whatever that could impact the placement of things. You may have a fantastic spot to put a nice wood chip lot that costs very little. However, there's a gas pipeline there and you're not allowed to do any construction in that site. So now you've got to move your site to an area that doesn't allow for controlling that runoff. You don't have a very nice area for a vegetated treatment filter or something like that. So your tools in your toolbox become limited, so to speak. So all of these things, all of these considerations work together on a farm to really kind of understand what needs to be done out there. So we're going to run through just a couple of field examples real quick. This is a before photo. It came from Westmoreland County Conservation District. Thank you. And pretty typical situation. I don't think I've ever been on this farm, but I've seen this picture before in many different spots, and I'm sure several of you have as well. There's often new barns constructed next to old barns, and we have stormwater issues and water congregating here, runoff happening, piles of manure. The treatment here was to concrete between these barns, control this runoff, keep as much clean water out of this area as possible. There's some curbing back here controlling the runoff so it doesn't leave the site, and all of this is collected and then stored in or removed from the site afterwards. So there's no roof here. It didn't make sense to have a roof here. It wasn't necessary. And this practice is kind of addressing all of the resource concerns that there were on the site. Here's another one in Snyder County. And you can see this is, I believe it's an access lane or a township road. I'm not sure which, but there's a heavy use area here that bleeds out into the pasture. Animals using this area for feeding, nutrients running off the site. And at this site, probably due to constraints of the site, they chose to go with a roofed heavy use area protection. And they have now their animals that are going to be residing in here when they can't be out on the pastures, fed in here, etc. This area has all been stabilized, roof water has been controlled and outletted. This side slope here that leads down to this township road or access lane is controlled. And where there would have been concentrated flow of nutrients running off the site, it's all controlled now. And the tool in our toolbox was this roofed heavy use area protection. And here's another site that is up in Bradford County. This was done, I think, 2019-ish with a conservation innovation grant, maybe some other funding sources. You can hop right on their website, and they've got a lot of great information about this project there. Some time-lapse videos. It's a really cool project. Wanted to throw it in here just to show something different that can be done. So one of the earlier slides was a wood chip lot, and that was really small number of animals, wood chips on top of the ground. This one's a little bit more engineered. This is a larger wood chip lot for a beef operation. And within this, we have actually some pipes and gravel underneath the wood chips so that the infiltration of rainwater and everything else that's hitting this site can percolate down through into this collection system, and then it's collected like maybe milk house water or something like that into a tank, and then it's spray irrigated, if I recall, out onto a field from there, so that in a vegetated treatment area. So all of our water is being controlled. Our dirty water is being treated and controlled, and animal health here is fantastic from what I understand. The wood chips I talked to Kevin a little bit about this earlier, have been replaced twice since this was installed in 2019. So it's been a really great project for them to kind of track over time and think about some different alternatives to just using concrete out there. All right, so some key takeaways. Like Patrick said, know what is actually required, know what is required of us to be doing these ACAP projects, you know, whether it's somebody just comes in and wants to just do cover crops. What is our baseline compliance with the ACAs that might be on these sites, and how are we going to address them to then do those other ACAP applications? And do we need to go the route that there's significant investment into the treatment, or are there some lower cost alternatives that can be used that we can stretch these ACAP dollars farther? If you're a county that's a minimum county, you may not have the funding in place to be able to build roofed heavy use areas everywhere. So this is a little bit of that out of the box thinking on how do we achieve baseline compliance and still do a lot of good conservation out there. Prioritizing that impact and making those ACAP dollars go farther. That's basically what I just said, and just keep it simple. And I like this last part. I think Kayla, you wrote this in here. No structures for structure's sake. So just remember that that's not the only tool that we have in our toolbox. There's probably a lot of pressure that you're getting from producers when they're coming in and applying for ACAP programs, that's the practice that they want. And when it's appropriate, it totally makes sense, and we figure out how to fund that. But it may not always be appropriate or needed. So if you have questions about specific projects like this in your county, you can always reach out to your regional SCC rep or any of us at the center, and we can help you walk through those. And that's all I had. Kayla, you can take it back over.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, now we just have some time to open up for questions, so I'll stop sharing so everyone can see who's talking. You're welcome to unmute and ask a question. You can throw it in the chat. I'll make sure I pay attention to that as well. And we'll first start with any questions related to this specific webinar topic, but then, once we've addressed those, we can definitely switch to just general ACAP questions. We have quite a few people from SCC available to answer those questions today. Any questions? I don't see anything coming in the chat. Does anyone want to unmute? Oh, Erin raised her hand. Erin has a question.
I'll just kick it off with the question. Can anybody describe more about the wood chip lots in terms of management and maintenance and the costs of the wood chips? Like, how are those managed over the long term?
Yeah, I'm not 100% versed in this. Kevin was messaging this morning, wishing he could be on the webinar, maybe take some of these questions for that specific project. But they're a lot less cost. For one, like you can often source wood chips for free. So you don't have the cost of the aggregate to go in there. Something like the one that I shared that happened in Bradford County has costs associated with that drainage field. But if you have a really small producer and the right site that you could utilize just wood chips on top of the ground, there's almost no cost that could be there. That one picture we shared in the slide had temporary fencing and wood chips. So there was no cost associated with that. Long-term maintenance depends on a couple different things: animal numbers, the amount of water that's hitting that site, etc. So wood chips are a high carbon source. It's kind of like running compost. When you are having animals on there, the amount of manure and liquid that are mixing with them will create this composting effect, and they're kind of going to last about that long. It's never a one size fits all type prescription, as I understand it. but because they're such a high carbon source, they're going to be lasting a lot longer than, say, straw or sawdust or something like that. And it's definitely ripe for some demonstration and some ability to kind of like follow some of these projects. So if you encounter some producers that are interested in something like this, we'd really like to be involved and start to track and think about some of those questions, Aaron, and what it is that we're actually doing here, how long it's lasting, what are the O&M requirements outside of what we anticipate, different things like that. So, Patrick, anything else to add there?
No, I think you did well with that. Yeah, I'll just reemphasize if there's anybody out there who thinks they have a farmer who might be interested in doing something like that. Yeah, we're very interested in doing some more research and some more considerations, more discussions around these wood chip lots. So if you have something or you may have something, send it our way.
Thanks, Phil.
Any other questions about ACAs, HUAs, HUAPs? Or Eric, is there anything that you want to just add or reiterate that we discussed?
No, you did a really good job of covering the material there. I just want to let the districts know that if you have any questions, please reach out to SCC or CACAT. I mean, if we don't have the answer, we'll find the answer for you somewhere. That could be off the wall stuff. Could be any everyday things that you might run into. Please, if you have any questions, reach out to us because we're here for it to help.
If there's no questions about that, I'm happy to open it up if anyone has any other general ACAP questions while you have some SCC reps as a captive audience.
Hey Pat, this is Patrick Cullen here. I don't know how to raise my hand, so I'm just gonna go for it.
All right.
Kevin, is available for questions if you guys have any. He just told me to go grab them. I guess in terms of the wood chip barnyard, I know we got a lot of our resources from the state of Vermont. They've done wood chip barnyards up there with NRCS. And I guess the one thing we're looking at doing another one. The one thing I would heavily emphasize is you just have to make sure you have the right soils underneath it. Is kind of the I guess point I've been making.
Yep. Yeah, good point. Thanks for that, Pat.
While you are thinking of any additional questions, I'll take this opportunity with this captive audience to quickly plug the Engineering Assistance Request Program again. We have that program. If you haven't heard of it, you can, on the center's website, they're under the practice approval system in that general area. There's a web page for the Engineering Assistance Request Program. We do have some funding available through that to help with engineering services that, range from initial ACAP project proposals through project design, construction oversight, checkout. That funding that we have to expend by the end of 2026, and we've probably only, I think maybe 1/3-ish, probably less even, allocated the funds that we have in place for that. So if you have any projects that are coming down the line that you need some help with engineering on in any capacity, feel free to reach out to me directly or hop on the website, check out the information that we have there, and there's a link to a survey for you to enroll your project.
And it's not super complicated, give us as much information as you can, but there aren't major requirements. It's not like a giant application. It's just trying to get an idea of what support you might need.
And just to put a plug in, we are going to have these monthly. Some of the future plans that we have for webinars is farm lanes, some of the the plans and the policies that may go along with those plans. And we will be doing a annual report webinar here coming up in November. So I think the date on that is November 6th. We'll be, Jim Feder and I will be presenting the annual report for ACAP.
You should all be getting invites to those on the ACAP listserv. If anyone was forwarded this and did not directly get it, feel free to shoot me a message in the chat too, and we can make sure you get added to the ACAP listserv so you're not missing out on anything. Any other questions? All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.